My name is Edith Thornbridge. I'm 77 years old, and my own son gave me an ultimatum: serve his wife like a maid or leave their home. He never dreamed that when I walked out that door, I wasn't just leaving. I was walking straight to a plan that would bring their comfortable world crumbling down. It's a long story, so grab a cup of coffee. I'm telling you this from my little apartment in Burlington on a sunny Monday afternoon. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let me know in the comments below. For me, this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about remembering who you are when the people you love most have forgotten. The first thing you should know about the house on Maple Creek Lane is that it wasn't mine. It belonged to my son Daniel and his wife Pasley. But it was built with the bones of my old life. Every gleaming hardwood floor, every stainless steel appliance, every square foot of their open-concept living space was paid for with the sale of my home, the one I had shared with my husband Tomas for 40 wonderful years. After Tomas's funeral, the silence in our little house in Refield was deafening. The garden he had so lovingly tended felt like a graveyard of memories. Daniel, seeing my grief, had come to me with a proposition that sounded like salvation. "Mom, sell the house," he'd said, his voice full of a manufactured concern I was too heartbroken to recognize. "Come live with us. Pasley and I are worried about you being alone. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll take care of you." I believed him. In my fog of sorrow, the idea of family, of being needed, was a lifeline. I sold the house, the garden, the memories, and handed over the substantial sum from the sale for them to put into what Daniel called a joint trust fund for my future. It was, he assured me, my inheritance from Tomas working for me. The truth was, Daniel was struggling after a bad investment, and my money wasn't a safety net for my future, it was a lifeline for his present. I didn't know that then. I just saw my son, and I trusted him. That was 3 years ago. The promise of being cared for had quickly soured into the reality of being the unpaid live-in help. My day started at 5:30 a.m., long before the sun rose. I'd tiptoe down the stairs, the creak of the third step of familiar protest in the quiet house. First, the coffee. Daniel liked a dark roast, black. Pasley preferred a specific, ethically sourced light roast with a splash of oat milk warmed to precisely 120 degrees. I'd make both. Then came breakfast. Scrambled eggs and bacon for Daniel, a bowl of organic oatmeal with fresh berries and a sprinkle of chia seeds for Pasley. For me, I ate whatever was left, usually standing over the sink. My days were a blur of chores: laundry, dusting, walking their lazy but lovable golden retriever Chester, and of course cooking. Pasley worked from home, a lifestyle consultant, and her critiques were constant, delivered in a serene, cutting tone. "Edit, you used a bit too much salt in the soup," she'd murmur, not looking up from her laptop. "Remember, we're focusing on reducing our sodium intake." Or, "I noticed a streak on the glass coffee table. Let's try to be more mindful with the polish." I swallowed the criticism, telling myself I was contributing, that this was my role in the family now. But a part of me felt like I was shrinking, fading into the beige walls of their perfectly curated house. The real gut punch came when I tried to bring a piece of my old life into my new one. "I was thinking of having Carol and June over for tea on Friday," I announced, trying to sound casual. They were my oldest friends, my rocks from the local science club back in Refield. I miss their easy laughter. Pasley looked up from her tablet, a small, tight smile on her face. "Oh, what a lovely idea, Edit! Of course!" I spent the next 2 days planning. I'd bake my famous lemon poppy seed muffins. I bought a special Earl Grey tea. I was excited, a feeling so foreign, it felt like a flutter in my chest. On Thursday evening, Pasley found me in the kitchen. "Oh, Edit, I am so terribly sorry. I completely forgot. I scheduled the deep carpet cleaning for tomorrow afternoon. The whole house will be in chaos, and the chemical smell, it just won't be a pleasant environment for guests."
My heart sunk. "Oh, well, we can reschedule." "Of course," she said, patting my arm. "We'll find another time." But we never did. There was always a reason. A webinar she had to host, a yoga retreat, a sudden need to detox the home's energy. I soon understood. This wasn't my home. I was living in their world, on their terms, and there was no room for my friends, my life, my past. I was a gear in their machine, useful as long as I was silent and efficient. That night, I sat in my small, sterile room, they called it the guest suite, and looked at the one photo I had on the wall. Tomas and me on our 40th anniversary, his arm around me, both of us beaming. He had always called me my brilliant scientist. He had loved my sharp mind, my curiosity. What would he think of me now? A woman who couldn't even have her friends over for tea. A woman who measured her worth in perfectly cooked oatmeal and streak-free tables. I felt a profound sense of shame. But I still wasn't ready to fight. I didn't know how. The final push, the one that would awaken the sleeping scientist within me, would come in the form of a whisper from the room next door. The whisper that changed everything came on a cold November night. I was on my way to bed, my hand on the polished oak banister, when I heard their voices drifting from their master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I knew I shouldn't listen. It wasn't my place. But something in Pasley's tone, a conspiratory hiss, made me freeze. The designer is coming on Monday to finalize the plans. The entire second floor is going to feel so much more intentional. The whole floor? Daniel's voice was lower, hesitant. What about Mom's room? A short, sharp laugh from Pasley. Darling, that's the best part. We turn her room into your home office, a real one, with proper soundproofing, no more taking calls from the kitchen table. And we knock down the wall to the main bathroom, expand it, put in a double vanity and a steam shower. I held my breath, my knuckles turning white against the banister. My room. My bathroom. She was talking about erasing my small corner of the world. But where will she stay? Daniel asked, and for a fleeting moment I felt a surge of hope. He was standing up for me.
Don't be dramatic, Pasley sighed, her voice dripping with condescension. We'll fix up the basement. It's spacious. We can put down a rug, get a nice lamp. It'll be cozy, a little apartment for her. Then came the words that struck me like a physical blow. She's like a piece of vintage furniture, Daniel. Useful for a while, but now she's just taking up valuable space. It's time to move her to storage. Vintage furniture. Storage. My blood ran cold. I wasn't a mother, not a grandmother, not even a person to her. I was an object, an inconvenience. I waited to hear Daniel's defense, his outrage. I waited for him to say, "Don't you dare talk about my mother that way." But all that came was a long, weary sigh. Okay, Pasley, okay. Just let me be the one to tell her. I didn't hear anymore. I couldn't. I crept back to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, the words echoing in my head. Basement. Storage. Vintage furniture. They weren't just moving me out of my room, they were moving me out of their lives, pushing me down into the dark, damp foundations of the house built with my own money. They were burying me before I was even dead. For 3 years, I had excused their behavior. I had told myself Daniel was stressed with his job, that Pasley just had high standards. I had made myself smaller and smaller to fit into the box they had built for me. But hearing those words, hearing the casual cruelty in Pasley's voice and the weak compliance in my own son's, something inside me broke. Or maybe it didn't break.
Maybe it finally hardened. The grief that had clouded my judgment for 3 years began to clear. The scientist in me, the woman who believed in observation, evidence, and logical conclusions, began to stir. I had been operating on a faulty hypothesis that my love and sacrifice would be returned. The data was now overwhelming. My hypothesis was wrong. I needed a new one. I lay in bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I was observing. I was analyzing. The problem was not the basement. The problem was not Pasley. The problem was that I had allowed my value to be determined by people who saw me as a piece of furniture. The solution, therefore, was not to argue about which corner of the house I would be stored in. The solution was to walk out of the house entirely. But I couldn't just leave. I was 77 years old with no home and, I presumed, no money of my own. They had made me dependent. Or so they thought. My new hypothesis began to form. My dependence was an illusion they had created, and like any good scientist, I knew I needed to test it. I needed more data. My investigation had just begun. The first step would be the arrival of my secret weapon, my granddaughter, Marlo. She was coming for Thanksgiving weekend, and she, I knew, had no patience for faulty hypotheses. Marlo blew into the house that Wednesday afternoon like a gust of fresh, honest wind, scattering the stagnant air of unspoken resentment. At 22, she had my curiosity, but a fire that was all her own. She was in her final year of law school, and she possessed a sharp, unwavering sense of justice that I secretly admired. She hugged me tight, her embrace strong and real. "Grandma, you feel thinner," she whispered in my ear, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Are they feeding you?" "Of course, dear," I said, forcing a smile. Pasley glided into the hallway, her own smile perfectly in place. "Marlo, welcome! We're so glad you could make it." "Hi, Pasley," Marlo said, her tone polite but cool. Her eyes, however, were doing a rapid scan of the room, of me, and the subtle power dynamics that hung in the air like dust motes. The first sign of trouble came at dinner. I had made a roast pot, one of Marlo's favorites. "This is delicious, Grandma," Marlo said after her first bite. "It's a bit heavy for a weeknight," Pasley commented, delicately picking at her salad. "All that saturated fat. We've been trying to get Odette to embrace a more plant-forward approach." Marlo put her fork down. "She's been cooking for this family for years. I think she knows what she's doing." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Daniel cleared his throat. "So, Marlo, how are your classes? Thinking about what kind of law you want to practice?" It was a blatant attempt to change the subject, and it worked for a while. But Marlo was an observer, just like me. Over the next day, she watched. She saw me get up to clear the plates while Daniel and Pasley checked their phones. She saw me quietly folding laundry that wasn't mine. She saw Pasley hand me a list of organic, non-GMO groceries for my next trip to the store. The explosion came on Friday morning. Marlo found me in my room, staring out the window. "Grandma, what's wrong?" she asked, sitting on the bed beside me. "And don't say nothing. I can see it in your eyes. You look like you did right after Grandpa Tomas passed." Her directness disarmed me. The dam I had so carefully constructed inside me began to crack. I told her. I told her about the whispers, the plan to renovate, the word basement. Marlo's face went from concern to disbelief and then to a cold, hard anger. She stood up, her fists clenched. "Basement? Are you kidding me? They want to put you in the basement?" Her voice was rising. "That's not just disrespectful, that's inhumane." "Marlo, please keep your voice down," I urged, terrified Pasley would hear. "No, I will not keep my voice down," she said, marching out of my room. I hurried after her. She found Daniel and Pasley in the kitchen, sipping their respective morning beverages. I want to know what this is about moving my grandmother into the basement, Marlowe demanded, her voice ringing with the authority of a future prosecutor. Pasley raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I'm not sure that's any of your business, Marlowe. This is a family matter. She's my family, Marlowe shot back. You sell her home, you take her money, you use her as a free maid for 3 years, and now you want to lock her away in a dark hole so you can have a steam shower? What is wrong with you? Now listen here, Daniel started, finally finding his voice. We are providing your grandmother with a home. We feel, given her age, that a simpler living arrangement downstairs might be safer for her. Safer? Marlowe laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You're not doing it for her safety. You're doing it for your convenience. Don't you dare lie to me. The argument escalated. They called Marlowe young and naive. She called them selfish and cruel. I just stood in the doorway, my heart torn between pride in my granddaughter and the old familiar fear of making waves. I was losing. We were losing. They were 2 against 1, and they held all the power. But then Marlowe said something that changed the entire equation. She turned to me, her anger softening for a moment. Grandma, this is insane. But it might be illegal. That money from Grandpa's house, it was put in a trust, right? What does the trust agreement say? Are you getting your quarterly statements?
The words hung in the air. Quarterly statements? Daniel's face went pale. Pasley's smirk faltered. Statements? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Daniel always told me he was handling the paperwork, that I didn't need to worry about it. Marlowe's eyes narrowed, locking onto her father. Dad, you're the trustee, and you haven't been providing the beneficiary, your own mother, with her legal statements for 3 years? The air in the kitchen grew thick and heavy. This was no longer just a family squabble about living arrangements. Marlowe, with a few sharp questions, had just turned on a light in a very dark room, and in that light, I started to see the outlines of something far worse than disrespect. I saw the shadow of a crime. After Marlowe left on Sunday, a fragile, icy truce settled over the house. Pasley was icily polite, Daniel was evasive, and I was a ghost, drifting through the rooms with a newfound purpose. Marlowe's questions had ignited the dormant scientist within me. I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator. My kitchen, once a place of servitude, became my laboratory. My hypothesis was simple. They hadn't just taken my independence, they had taken my money. Now I needed to gather the evidence to prove it. My first experiment began late at night, long after the house had fallen silent. I crept into the small office nook off the living room where Daniel kept his files. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I felt like a burglar in a house that should have been partly mine. I was looking for one thing: the file folder from the sale of my Refield house. I found it tucked away at the back of a filing cabinet, labeled simply Family Finances. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were the closing documents from the sale and a thick document titled The Thornbridge Family Revocable Trust. I took the entire folder back to my room. Under the dim light of my bedside lamp, I began to read. I had signed these papers 3 years ago, my mind clouded with grief, trusting Daniel completely. Now I read them with the sharp focus of a researcher. The next part of my investigation required a skill I didn't have. I needed to see a bank statement. Marlowe had told me it was possible online, but the very idea was intimidating. The following afternoon, while Pasley was out at a yoga class, I called my granddaughter. "Marlowe, it's me," I whispered into the phone. "I have the trust documents, but I need to see the account. Can you walk me through it?" "Absolutely, Grandma," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Go to Daniel's computer. What bank is it?" For 30 minutes, she was my guide. She patiently instructed me on how to open a web browser, how to navigate the bank's website. We found a forgot password link and used my personal information, my date of birth, my social security number, to reset it, sending a temporary code to my cell phone. With each step, I felt a surge of empowerment. I was learning. I was taking control. Finally, we were in. The account page loaded. At the top, in bold green numbers, was the current balance. My breath hitched in my throat. I had to read it twice to believe it. $237.19. Over $300,000 from the sale of my house, after paying off the small remaining mortgage and setting aside a generous college fund for Marlowe's final year, there had been nearly $150,000 left. That was the money that had gone into this trust. Now, there was just nothing. "Grandma, are you there? What do you see?" Marlowe's voice crackled over the phone. $237, I said, my own voice sounding hollow and distant. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, Grandma, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Marlowe," I said. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The shock was giving way to an icy resolve. "Be my research assistant. Can we see the transaction history?" We could. Page after page, we scrolled through 3 years of their lives, paid for by my past. A $60,000 down payment on a new luxury SUV for Pasley, monthly payments to a high-end interior designer, charges from expensive restaurants, boutique clothing stores, and a spa resort in Arizona. It was all there, a digital ledger of their betrayal. Daniel had been giving himself distributions from the trust, thousands of dollars at a time, labeling them vaguely as family expenses. My hands didn't shake anymore. I took screenshots. I saved them to a USB drive I'd bought at the pharmacy. This was my data. Cold, hard, undeniable data. But the most crucial piece of evidence wasn't in the bank statement. It was in the document I had taken from the filing cabinet. Armed with the knowledge of their theft, I spent the next 2 nights poring over the trust agreement with a magnifying glass and a yellow highlighter, just as I used to do with scientific papers. Much of it was dense legalese about inheritance and trustees. But then, on page 14, in a section titled Beneficiary Welfare, I found it. My heart stopped. It was a clause I had vaguely remembered my lawyer mentioning, a standard provision, he'd called it. "The primary purpose of this trust is to provide for the health, support, and maintenance of the beneficiary, Edith Thornbridge, for the remainder of her natural life. This includes, but is not limited to, ensuring the beneficiary resides in a safe, comfortable, and dignified living environment within the primary family residence, defined as a private room with adequate size and with reasonable access to amenities." I read it again and again. A private room with adequate size. The basement was not a private room with adequate size. It was storage. They hadn't just broken my heart. They had broken the contract. This wasn't a secret trick left by Tomas. This was a standard legal protection that I, in my grief, had overlooked and that they, in their arrogance, had ignored. This was my loophole. This was my weapon. And it was a weapon I had discovered myself. The detective in the kitchen had found the smoking gun. Now I just had to figure out how to use it. Finding the clause in the trust document was like finding a key in a prison cell. For the first time in 3 years, I saw a path out. But a key is useless if you don't know which lock it fits. I had the evidence, but I didn't have a plan. I was a 77-year-old woman with a USB drive full of incriminating screenshots and a highlighted legal document. I couldn't exactly walk into a police station. This was a family matter, a civil matter. I needed a lawyer. The thought terrified me. Lawyers meant money, and I had exactly $237 to my name. The image of a high-powered attorney in a sleek downtown office like the ones you see on TV felt as unattainable as the moon.
My son had not only stolen my past, he had stolen my future, leaving me with no resources to fight for it. Despair began to creep in, cold and heavy. What good was evidence if I couldn't afford to present it?
That night, I called Elizabeth. She was my oldest friend, a retired nurse who had been widowed a few years before Tomas passed. She was pragmatic, tough, and had a no-nonsense attitude that I desperately needed. I didn't just call for sympathy. I called for a strategy session. "Liz, it's me," I said, my voice low. "It's worse than I thought." I laid out everything. The basement, the missing money, the trust document, the clause. I expected her to be shocked, to rage on my behalf. Instead, she was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steel. "Okay, Edie," she said, using my old nickname. "So, the little monsters have shown their true colors. Good. Now we know what we're dealing with. Forget about fancy lawyers. You don't need a shark. You need a guide." "A guide?" "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "My sister, Helen, went through a nasty divorce a few years back. Her husband tried to hide all his assets. She didn't have a dime. She went to a place called the Women's Legal Aid Center downtown. They work on a sliding scale. Sometimes for seniors in your situation, the initial consultation is free. They specialize in this stuff, financial abuse, elder care disputes. They're not flashy, Edie, but they're fighters." A flicker of hope, a sliding scale. It was a tangible first step. "I have their number," Elizabeth continued. "I'll text it to you. You call them tomorrow. You tell them your story. You tell them about the clause." She paused. "And one more thing. You need a safe place to land. My guest room is ready whenever you are. You pack a bag, just the essentials, documents, clothes, that picture of you and Tomas. When you're ready to walk out that door, you come here. Understood?" "Understood," I said, a wave of gratitude washing over me. This was what a true friend was. Not just a shoulder to cry on, but a partner in the escape plan. The next day, my hands shaking, I made the call. I was transferred to a paralegal named Maria. I recited my story, my voice clinical and detached, as if I were describing a scientific experiment. I told her about Section 4, Paragraph B of the trust agreement. Maria listened patiently. "Mrs. Thornbridge," she said when I had finished, "based on what you're telling me, the clause you found is significant. It represents a clear breach of the trustee's fiduciary duty. Can you come in for a consultation? We can have one of our attorneys, Ms. Albright, meet with you. There will be no charge." The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. A week. I had one more week to live in this house, to play the part of the docile, oblivious mother. But now, it wasn't a role of defeat. It was a role of strategy. I was an undercover agent gathering final intelligence before my extraction. I watched them. I saw the way Pasley was already talking about paint colors for my room, her future office. I saw the relief in Daniel's eyes, the relief of a man who thought he had gotten away with it. They were so confident, so arrogant. They saw a frail old woman who was easy to manage. They had no idea they were living with a detective who had already solved the case and was just waiting for the right moment to reveal her findings. The final piece of my plan fell into place on Friday evening. Pasley approached me in the kitchen, a saccharine sweet smile on her face. "Edit, Daniel and I were thinking, it's been a while since we had a proper family dinner, just the three of us. Would you be willing to make your special roast beef next Friday, the one Daniel loves so much? We'd like to talk about the future." I looked at her, my face a carefully blank canvas. It was the perfect setup. They were planning to deliver their final verdict, their ultimatum, over a meal I had cooked. They were setting the stage for my surrender. They had no idea I was setting the stage for my liberation. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice soft. "I'd be happy to." The week leading up to the special dinner was the longest week of my life. I moved through the days like a spy in my own home, my every action carefully calculated. On the surface, I was the same Edit,
quiet, accommodating, preparing for a family meal. Beneath the surface, I was coordinating a quiet rebellion. My allied network consisted of three remarkable women: a retired nurse, a law student, and a legal aid attorney. My meeting with Ms. Albright at the Women's Legal Aid Center was a turning point. The office wasn't fancy. It was in a modest downtown building with fluorescent lights and well-worn furniture. But there was an energy of purpose there. Ms. Albright was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid everything out on her desk: the highlighted trust agreement, the USB drive with the bank statements, and a handwritten timeline. I told my story for the third time, but this time it was a legal deposition. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she picked up the trust agreement. "This clause is your leverage, Mrs. Thornbridge," she said, her voice firm. "It's not ambiguous. They had a legal and financial duty to provide you with dignified housing, and they failed. Planning to move you to a basement is a clear, actionable breach." "So what happens?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "First, you get out," she said. "Your personal safety and well-being are the priority. You have a place to go?" "Yes," I said, thinking of Elizabeth's clean, quiet guest room. "Good," Ms. Albright nodded. "Once you are out, we act. We will send them a formal letter of notification. We will inform them that as the trustee, Daniel is in breach of contract. We will petition the court to have him removed as trustee and to freeze the remaining assets of the trust, all $237 of it." I must have looked disappointed. She smiled grimly. "That's just the start. The real power move is this. We will demand a full accounting of every dollar spent from that trust since its inception, and we will sue to have it repaid. Every vacation, every car payment, every designer handbag. They used your money as a personal slush fund. We're going to make them accountable for it." The word sue sounded terrifying. It sounded aggressive, ugly. I don't want a war," I stammered. Ms. Albright's gaze softened for a moment. "Mrs. Thornbridge, they declared war when they decided your life savings were their personal piggy bank. We are not starting a fight. We are finishing one they started. You are not being vindictive. You are standing up for yourself. Let us handle the legal battle. Your only job is to get yourself to safety and start rebuilding your life." I left her office with a clear three-step plan. Step 1, endure the dinner. Step 2, leave the house. Step 3, let Ms. Albright unleash the legal storm. My daily phone calls with Marlo became my lifeline. She was my tech support and my cheerleader. "Did you make a copy of the USB drive, Grandma?" she'd ask, her voice sharp and practical. "Keep one with you and give one to Elizabeth for safekeeping."
I did, I'd tell her. "And the original documents, are they hidden?" "In the bottom of my knitting bag. They'll never look there." "Good," she'd say. "You're doing great, Grandma. You're a fighter. I'm so proud of you." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. She didn't see me as a frail old woman. She saw me as a warrior. Elizabeth was my logistics chief. "I've aired out the guest room," she told me over the phone. "Fresh sheets on the bed. I bought your favorite tea. The house is quiet. Chester can come too if you can get him out. We'll figure it out. Just focus on Friday night. Get through it. And then come home, Edie. Come home." Home. The word sounded so foreign, so beautiful. By Friday morning, my nerves were a tangled mess, but my resolve was solid. I was not one woman against her powerful son and his manipulative wife. I was the head of a small, brilliant team. We had a lawyer for the attack, a student for the research, and a nurse for the safe harbor. They saw me as frail, independent. They had no idea about the network I had built in the shadows. They were about to deliver an ultimatum to a woman who had already declared her independence. Friday arrived cloaked in a deceptive calm. The air in the house was thick with anticipation. They thought it was their anticipation. In reality, it was mine. I spent the day in the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate. I was preparing the fatted calf for my own departure. I seasoned the roast beef just the way Daniel liked it, with rosemary and garlic. I whipped potatoes until they were creamy and light. I glazed carrots with honey and thyme. The aroma that filled the house was one of happy family dinners, of tradition, of love. It was a lie, of course. It was the smell of a beautifully set trap. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a character in a play. There was Edith Thornbridge, the devoted mother, humming softly as she basted the roast. But inside, I was a general on the eve of a major battle, reviewing my strategy one last time. Let them lead. Let them say the words. Do not show anger. Show disappointment. Then execute the plan. Daniel came home early from his job at the insurance firm, a strained smile on his face. "Wow, Mom, it smells amazing, just like when I was a kid." "I hope you'll enjoy it," I said, my voice even. Paciali descended the stairs at 7 o'clock sharp, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair perfect. She surveyed the dining table, which I had set with the good china and cloth napkins. "You've really outdone yourself, Edith," she said, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It was the first compliment she had given me in months. It was also, I knew, meant to soften me up for the blow to come. We sat down to eat. The meal was an exercise in surrealism. They made small talk about Daniel's potential promotion, about a new art gallery Paciali had visited. I played my part, murmuring non-committal responses, passing the gravy boat, asking if the beef was tender enough. I ate very little. My stomach was a tight knot of nerves. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Paciali folded her hands on the table. Her face took on a look of grave seriousness. The performance was about to begin. "Edith," she started, her voice soft and cloying, "Daniel and I wanted to talk to you. We've been doing a lot of thinking about the future and about what's best for everyone." I looked at her, then turned my gaze to my son. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring intently at his water glass. "As you know," Paciali continued, "the house needs some updating, and Daniel desperately needs a proper home office, so we've decided to move forward with the second-floor renovation." She paused, waiting for my reaction. I gave her none. I simply sat there, my hands folded in my lap. "This brings us to your living situation, Edith. We feel that at this stage of your life, it's time for a change, a simpler, more manageable space. We've decided the best option is to convert the basement into a small apartment for you." Daniel finally looked up, a pleading expression on his face. "It'll be really cozy, Mom. We'll get a new rug, a comfortable chair." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I spoke, my voice quiet but clear. "I see. And the money from the sale of my house, the trust fund, is there anything left to pay for this renovation or for my care?" Paciali scoffed. "Edith, we've been over this. The market has been down. There were expenses. The trust is depleted." "Depleted," I repeated the word, letting it settle between us. "You mean it's gone?" "Effectively, yes," Daniel mumbled, staring at his hands. "It's gone." "So let me be clear," I said, looking from his face to Paciali's. "You have spent all of my money, and now you want me to live in your basement? In return for what? My cooking and cleaning?" This was it. The ultimatum. Paciali's eyes hardened. The pretense of concern vanished. "Let's be adults about this, Edith," she said, her voice turning sharp. "This is our house. We're offering you a roof over your head. The new conditions are simple. You contribute to the running of the household as you have been. You accept the new living arrangement without complaint, and you stop filling Marlowe's head with dramatic, upsetting stories. If you can agree to that, you can stay. If not," she left the threat hanging in the air. "If not, I should leave," I finished for her. "With nothing. The choice is yours," Paciali said, sitting back with an air of finality. I took a slow, deep breath. The moment had come. I looked at Daniel, my son,
The boy I had raised. He still wouldn't meet my gaze. He had made his choice. I understand, I said softly. I pushed my chair back from the table. Thank you for making everything so clear. If you'll excuse me, I need to go upstairs. I need to speak with Daniel. Alone. Paciali looked momentarily thrown. This wasn't in her script. She had expected tears or pleading or resigned broken acceptance. She had not expected a calm request for a private audience. She glanced at Daniel, who looked like a man being led to his own execution. He just nodded numbly. Fine, Paciali said, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. I'll be in the living room. She stood and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered promises in her wake. The silence that descended on the dining room was heavy and suffocating. It was just me and my son, surrounded by the remnants of a meal meant to symbolize family. Come to the kitchen, Daniel. It wasn't a request. He followed me like a sleepwalker. I stood by the sink, the place where I had spent countless hours washing dishes for him, and turned to face him. The fluorescent light of the kitchen was harsh, unforgiving. There were no soft shadows to hide in. Look at me.
Slowly, reluctantly, he raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale with guilt. He looked like the little boy who had once broken my favorite vase and tried to hide the pieces. I don't want to talk about Paisley, I began, my voice low and steady, devoid of the hysteria they had expected. She is who she is. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about my son. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of a single page from the bank statement. I unfolded it and laid it on the clean granite countertop between us. It showed the $60,000 transfer for Paisley's SUV. This was the week of my 75th birthday, I said softly. I remember because you both told me you were too busy to celebrate. You gave me a card. Paisley bought herself a car with the money your father and I worked our entire lives for. Daniel flinched as if I had struck him. Mom, it wasn't like that. It was a company car for her business. Don't, I said, my voice cutting through his excuse. Don't you dare lie to me now, Daniel. Not after everything. I pulled out another piece of paper, the invoice from the interior designer. And this, $25,000 for aesthetic consultation, the week you told me you couldn't afford to help me with the copay for my new glasses. He winced, shaking his head. I was going to pay it back, I swear. The trust, it was just supposed to be a loan. My promotion at work was supposed to come through, but my boss, It's always someone else's fault, isn't it? I asked, my voice still quiet, but now laced with a sorrow so deep it felt like it could crack the world open. When are you going to take responsibility for your own choices? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of my disappointment was crushing him. When I brought you home from the hospital, I held you in my arms and I promised I would always protect you. When you were 7, you fell off your bike and I cleaned your scraped knees and told you that you were brave. When you were struggling with physics in high school, I stayed up with you every night for a month drawing diagrams explaining formulas because I wanted you to understand the world. I taught you about integrity, Daniel, about honesty, about right and wrong. Tears were streaming down his face now. Silent, shameful tears. I know, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? I pressed. Sorry you got caught? Or are you sorry for what you did? Are you sorry that you took your grieving mother, a woman who would have given you her last breath, and you saw her not as a person, but as a bank account? Are you sorry that you stood by, silent, while your wife called me a vintage furniture to be moved into storage? He choked on a sob, unable to answer. I have the trust agreement, Daniel, I said, delivering the final blow. I read it. I read the part about a dignified living environment. I read it all. The boy I raised, the man I thought you were, would never have even considered putting his mother in a basement. He would never have stolen from her. So my question is this: where did that boy go?
This was the judgment, not a court of law, but the court of a mother's heart. He had been found wanting. He had no defense. He just stood there, a 45-year-old man, weeping like a child, broken by the truth of his own weakness. I looked at him for a long moment, the son I loved, the stranger he had become. There was nothing left to say. I had shown him the evidence. I had delivered my verdict. The pain of it was a physical thing, a knife in my chest. But beneath the pain, there was also a sliver of peace. The truth was finally out. "I'm going to my room now," I said softly, turning away from him. He didn't try to stop me. He knew, I think, that he had already lost me. I walked up the stairs, each step feeling both heavy and light. The confrontation with Daniel hadn't been about winning an argument. It had been about closing a chapter. I had held up a mirror to my son, and though the reflection was ugly, he had been forced to look. My part in his story was over. It was time to begin my own. My room, which had felt like a cell for 3 years, now felt like a staging ground. My suitcase was already packed, tucked away in the closet, just as Elizabeth had advised. I pulled it out. It was small, but it contained my entire world. A few sets of clothes, my essential medications, a warm sweater, my knitting bag, with the original documents nestled at the bottom, and the small framed photo of Tomas and me. I placed the suitcase by the door and sat down at the small desk. I took out a piece of plain stationery and a pen. My note would be short. There was no need for a long emotional explanation. I had already said everything that needed to be said to the only person that mattered. This note was for the record. My hand was steady as I wrote. "Daniel and Pasley, I accept the terms you offered tonight. I will be leaving. Do not worry about me. I have made my own arrangements. We will be in touch regarding the Thornbridge Family Trust through my legal counsel. Sincerely, Edith Thornbridge." I paused, then added a postscript, a final small act of defiance from the woman they thought of as just a cook and a cleaner. "P.S. Pasley, the orchids in the living room are getting too much direct sunlight. They will die if you don't move them to a shadier spot." I smiled a real smile for what felt like a lifetime. I folded the note and left it on the center of the perfectly made bed. Then I took my suitcase, my purse, and my dignity, and I walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. This wasn't a dramatic exit fueled by anger. It was a quiet, deliberate emancipation. The walk down the stairs was my victory lap. The same creaky third step that used to signal my morning servitude now sounded like a note in a triumphant hymn. They were in the living room. I could hear their hushed, tense voices. I walked straight past the doorway, heading for the front door, the small wheels of my suitcase making a soft whirring sound against the hardwood floor. The voices stopped. I heard footsteps, and then Daniel was standing in the hallway, his face a mess of confusion and panic. Pasley appeared behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. "Mom, what are you doing?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking. "Where are you going?" I turned to face them, my hand on the doorknob. "You offered me a choice, Daniel," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You said I could accept your new conditions or I could leave. I'm leaving." "Don't be ridiculous, Edith," Pasley snapped, stepping forward. "You can't just walk out here. It's nearly 11 o'clock at night. You're 77 years old. You have nowhere to go."
Her words, which were meant to be a final, dismissive judgment of my powerlessness, had the opposite effect. They filled me with a sudden, brilliant clarity. I looked at her, then at my son, and I gave them the most honest, liberating smile of my life. "That's where you're wrong, Pasley," I said. "You think my age is my weakness. You think my lack of a house is my weakness. But you're mistaken. My weakness was ever believing that my value was tied to your approval." I turned the doorknob. The lock clicked open with a satisfying finality. "As for having nowhere to go," I added, pulling the heavy door open and letting the cool, clean night air rush in, I am going to find myself. The woman you both tried so hard to erase. I imagine she's waiting for me. Without another word, without a backward glance, I stepped over the threshold and pulled the door closed behind me. I walked down the stone pathway, the sound of my suitcase wheels on the pavement the only sound in the quiet suburban night. I did not run. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. I was going home. To Elizabeth's. To my new life. The days that followed my departure were a blur of quiet healing and decisive action. Elizabeth's guest room was a sanctuary. It was small, with floral curtains and a comfortable quilt, but it felt more like home than the spacious guest suite I had just left. For the first time in 3 years, I slept through the night. I woke up not to an alarm, but to the sun streaming through the window. There were no breakfasts to make, no chores to do. There was just peace. Elizabeth was the perfect ally. She didn't fuss over me or treat me like a fragile piece of glass. She simply made me tea, sat with me in her sunny kitchen, and listened. She let me talk when I wanted to, and sat with me in comfortable silence when I didn't. On Monday morning, true to her word, Ms. Albright from the Legal Aid Center launched the first volley. She sent the formal letter via courier to the house on Maple Creek Lane. Elizabeth and I imagined the scene, Paisley, perhaps in her silk robe, signing for the crisp legal envelope. Her confusion turning to shock, then to fury as she read the contents. The letter, a copy of which was emailed to me, was a masterpiece of legal precision. It formally notified Daniel of his immediate breach of fiduciary duty as trustee. It cited Section 4, Paragraph B of the trust agreement. It informed them that we were petitioning the court to have him removed as trustee and that a full forensic accounting of the trust expenditures would be demanded. It concluded by stating that we would be pursuing legal action to reclaim all funds that were misappropriated for personal, non-beneficiary use. The fallout was immediate. That afternoon, my phone, which had been silent for days, began to ring incessantly. It was Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, a text message appeared on my screen. "Mom, please call me. We got a letter from a lawyer. This is a huge misunderstanding. We can fix this, please." I showed the text to Elizabeth. "A misunderstanding?" she snorted. "The only misunderstanding was that they thought you were a doormat." I followed Ms. Albright's instructions to the letter. No direct contact. All communication was to go through her office. The next call was from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Edith, it's Brenda from next door," said the syrupy voice of my former neighbor, the one who was Paisley's confidant. "Paisley is just devastated. She's so worried about you. She told me what happened, that you had a small disagreement and left. Honey, whatever it is, you should come back home. An old woman like you shouldn't be out on her own." The casual, condescending pity in her voice was enraging. "Thank you for your concern, Brenda," I said, my voice cold as ice. "But I am not on my own. I am with friends, and I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Please don't call this number again." I hung up. The real desperation began a week later. Daniel, unable to get through to me, sent a long, rambling email. Paisley's new SUV was a business necessity for her brand, he claimed. The renovations were an investment in the property. He begged me to call off the lawyers. He said Paisley was a wreck, that I was tearing the family apart. He ended the email with a final, desperate plea. "I'm your son. How can you do this to me?" I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to Ms. Albright. Her response was swift and dry.
Standard manipulation tactics. Ignore it. The court date for the preliminary hearing is set. The legal process was slow and grinding, but with Ms. Albright at the helm, it was relentless. They were forced to hire their own lawyer, at great expense. The court granted our petition to freeze the trust and remove Daniel as trustee, appointing a neutral third party to oversee it. The forensic accounting began. It turned out to be even worse than I had imagined. They had blown through nearly $140,000. The accountant's report was a stark chronicle of their greed. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of a long, ugly, and public court battle, their lawyer advised them to settle. The negotiation was brutal. Pasley and Daniel tried to lowball us, to claim a portion of the money was for legitimate household maintenance. Ms. Albright was unmovable. She presented them with a choice: repay 85% of the misappropriated funds within 90 days, or we would proceed with the lawsuit and make the accountant's findings public record. Checkmate. To come up with the money, they had no choice. They had to sell the house. The house on Maple Creek Lane, Pasley's monument to her own vanity. The place where I had been stored like furniture went up for sale. They also had to sell her luxury SUV. Their world of effortless comfort, built on a foundation of my life savings, had crumbled. It wasn't the dramatic, fiery explosion of a Hollywood movie. It was the slow, methodical, and legally binding collapse of a house of cards. And it was deeply, profoundly satisfying. Victory didn't feel like a sudden explosion of fireworks. It felt like a slow sunrise. The settlement money, when it finally arrived, was not a lottery win. It was a restitution. It was the return of my past and the key to my future. Following Ms. Albright's sound advice, I didn't use it to buy a new house. I put it into a secure, managed annuity, a fund that would provide me with a modest but stable monthly income for the rest of my life. An income that I, and only I, controlled. With my newfound security, I found a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet senior living community, not far from Elizabeth. It had a tiny balcony that got wonderful morning sun, and a clean, bright kitchen that was all my own. The first thing I bought was a single, beautiful orchid, which I placed in a spot with perfect indirect light. Every time I looked at it, I smiled. But a person cannot live on legal victories and comfortable apartments alone. I had my independence, but I needed a purpose. The long, quiet days sometimes felt empty. The ghost of my old life, the one where I was a teacher, a mentor, a creator, still lingered.
The answer came from an unexpected source. A neighbor of Elizabeth's, a kind, retired gentleman named Mr. Henderson, ran the local community greenhouse. One day, while visiting Liz, he saw me admiring her tomato plants. "You've got a gardener's eye," he said, his own eyes twinkling. "My husband, Tomas, taught me everything," I replied. "I haven't had my hands in the dirt in years. I miss it." "Well," he said with a smile, "we have a small vacant plot at the greenhouse. The last fellow who had it moved to Florida. It's a bit neglected, but the soil is good. It's yours, if you want it." It was the most beautiful offer I had received in years. The next day, I was there, my hands covered in rich, dark earth. I cleared the weeds. I tilled the soil. I planted seeds, tomatoes, cucumbers, basil, and marigolds to keep the pests away. That little patch of dirt became my canvas, my laboratory, my church. It was a place where my effort directly translated into growth, where nurturing was always rewarded. Soon, my work at the greenhouse attracted attention. Other gardeners would stop by to ask for advice. Kids from the neighborhood would peer through the glass, curious about the rows of green shoots. An idea began to sprout in my mind, as vibrant as my tomato seedlings. I went to Mr. Henderson. "What if," I proposed, We started a small program here, a science greenhouse for local kids. We could teach them about botany, about the life cycle of plants, about sustainable gardening. We could make science tangible and fun. Mr. Henderson's face lit up. That's the best idea I've heard in a decade. And so, at 78 years old, I became a teacher again. Twice a week, a small group of bright-eyed, curious children would gather at my plot. I taught them about photosynthesis, about companion planting, about the magic of a compost heap. We dissected flowers and examined root systems under a magnifying glass. I wasn't just vintage furniture anymore. I was Mrs. Thornbridge, the cool science lady who knew how to grow giant tomatoes. I had a name. I had a purpose. I had a community. Marlowe visited often, her pride in me shining in her eyes. "You know, Grandma," she said one afternoon as we sat on a bench surrounded by the scent of basil and warm earth, "you should tell your story. There are so many women out there who feel invisible, who feel like they've been put into storage. Your story could be a key for them, just like that clause was a key for you." I looked around at the life I had built from the ashes of my old one. The thriving plants, the sound of children's laughter, the warm sun on my face. My victory wasn't in the money I had reclaimed or in the house my son had been forced to sell. The victory was here, in this garden. It was in the quiet confidence of knowing I had rescued myself. My son Daniel tried to reach out a few times after the settlement. He sent a Christmas card with a short, stilted note. I never replied. Forgiveness is a complex thing. Perhaps one day I would find it in my heart, but for now, my energy was focused on cultivation, not excavation. I was done digging up the past. I was busy planting a future. And so, when people ask me how I did it, how I walked away at 77 with nothing but a suitcase, I tell them this. They tried to plant me in a dark basement, but they forgot one fundamental thing about me. I am a scientist, I am a gardener, and I have always known that for a seed to grow, it doesn't need a fancy house. It just needs a little bit of light and the strength to break through the soil all on its own.